Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, the 2nd of June, 2025. Today is day 605. Mondays are often hard days because of things that happened over the weekend and bad news coming from the Middle East or related to the Middle East in the United States or in other parts of the world. And unfortunately, today is no exception. 31 Palestinians were killed while they headed to an aid site in Gaza, witnesses say. Israel has denied responsibility. This was on Sunday. Yesterday, 31 people were killed, 170 wounded as large crowds were on their way to receive food from the Gaza Strip. Health officials and witnesses they say that the Israeli forces fired toward the crowd just before dawn, around a kilometer, which is about 1,100 yards from an aid site that's run by an Israeli-backed foundation. Israel's military denied that its forces fired at civilians near or within the site in the southern city of Rafah. And Israeli military officials, speaking on the condition of anonymity, in line with the procedures, said troops fired warning shots at several suspects, advancing towards them overnight. The military also released drone footage, it said, that was shot on Sunday, apparently in daylight, in the southern city of Khan Yunis, showing what it said were armed, masked men firing at civilians trying to collect aid. The Associated Press could not independently verify the video, and it was not clear who was being targeted. Hamas is doing everything in its power to prevent the successful distribution of food aid in Gaza, the statement said. From the videos I've seen, most of what it looks like is just that people are hungry. They've been cut off from food, from the basic life-needed supplies, from humanitarian assistance, and desperate people take desperate measures. God help us that this is still, there's still a hunger in Gaza. There's still bombs being dropped. There's still dozens of people dying and being killed every single day. 605 days into the ethnic cleansing genocide of Gaza. God help us. On the domestic side, here in the United States, the New York Times reported today that 8 people were hospitalized and injured in the U.S. in Boulder, Colorado, with burns and other injuries after a man used what officials called a makeshift flamethrower yesterday on an attack of demonstrators who were honoring Israeli hostages. And may I say again, God help us, the hostages should be released. Here's what we know about the attack. A 45-year-old man, Mohammed Sabri Salman, was taken into custody. Witnesses said he yelled "Free Palestine" during the attack. The FBI is investigating this as an act of terrorism. There's no immediate indication Salman was linked to any particular group. The injured ranged from ages 52 to 88 years old, and they were participating in a weekly event called Run for Their Lives, a demonstration held in cities around the world to call attention to Israeli hostages in Gaza. 2 are in serious condition. This attack, less than 2 weeks after a gunman killed the 2 Israeli employees in Washington, D.C., is likely to intensify the deep unease and fear of the Jewish community in the United States. The Colorado Governor Jared Polis said, "It's unfathomable that the Jewish community is facing another terror attack. I condemn this vicious act of terrorism and pray for the recovery of the victims." Friends, I don't have words with which to respond adequately. Violence begets violence. We must wholeheartedly and ardently condemn the actions that happened yesterday in Colorado. And if we care about justice for anyone, for Palestinians in Gaza, the perpetuation of violence anywhere and everywhere must be condemned. Someone shared this quote with me recently, just in the past few days, and I was familiar with it previously, but it's a good reminder. It's from Martin Luther King Jr., and it says, "Hate begets hate. Violence begets violence. Toughness begets a greater toughness. We must meet the forces of hate with the power of love. Our aim must never be to defeat or to humiliate." He's talking about the white man, but to win his friendship and understanding. What would our work look like if we sought to not humiliate, but to have love overcome violence, to seek friendship and understanding from the very people who are perpetuating the violence that we're working so ardently against? What a witness that would be for the church, for God. So other updates in the news. So I mentioned gunfire yesterday that killed more than 30 Palestinians. We talked about that. That was in numerous news sources all over the world. I'm sure there will be an investigation, at least by some media sources, if and we'll hear more about that. Desperate civilians the day before on Saturday looted 88 trucks that were traveling through South and Central Gaza. According to the World Food Program, they said that in a statement, after 80 days of a total blockade, communities are starving and the humanitarian situation in Gaza is spiraling. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is at its worst since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war, a UN spokesperson said on Friday, adding that the limited resumption of aid supply last week has had very, very little impact on this catastrophic situation. The U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, on Saturday said Hamas's response to the U.S. ceasefire deal and hostage proposal is totally unacceptable. It takes the negotiations backwards. Hamas said it wants the proposal to include an agreement for the group to release hostages over time to keep Israel at the bargaining table. Western countries are risking losing all credibility with the rest of the world if Israel is allowed a free pass on Gaza. Those were the words of French President Macron. He said that Friday, hours after threatening to harden the EU's collective position against Israel over the Gaza humanitarian situation. And Israel has said it will not cooperate with the Palestinian Authority's provocative plans to host a high-level Saudi-led delegation of foreign ministers in Ramallah and the occupied West Bank. We talked about that last week as well. Related to Syria, the self-styled Islamic State group on Thursday claimed responsibility for 2 bomb explosions that were directly targeting Damascus's new government. This is a war monitoring group reporting. And the Syrian government did not report any attacks by the Islamic State, but said that it had conducted raids against its operatives last week. Saudi Arabia and Qatar will jointly provide financial support to state employees in Syria. That was according to the Saudi foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud. He said that on Saturday. And Israel and Syria are holding face-to-face meetings at the border to calm tensions. Syrians, represented by the border governor, Ahmad al-Baladi, Israel by an unnamed security official, were having talks on the absence of war, not normalization for now. This is pretty significant for Syria and Israel to have direct talks in recent weeks and face-to-face meetings aimed at calming tensions and preventing conflict, along the border region is quite significant. So this is a development in terms of the ties between Syria and Israel, who've been on opposite sides of the Middle East conflict for decades. The U.S. is encouraging the new Islamist rulers in Damascus to establish relationships with Israel and for Israel to ease its strikes on Syria. So it seems like, according to some, even the Israelis are seeing, at least in this one very minute situation, the merit for peace, and the Druze minority in Syria that Israel supports is lightening the burden on the Syrians. Instead of Israel keeping the burden heavy as opposed to leverage on the new Syrian government, and for Israel and the Syrian Druze, it's paying dividends. Nuclear talks, the U.S. on Saturday presented the first formal proposal for elements of a nuclear deal to Tehran, hours after the International Atomic Energy Agency released a report saying it has serious concerns about Iran's further intensification of its production of highly enriched uranium in recent months. And then we talked about what happened in Colorado in the U.S. context. So that's the basic news update for the day. I wanted to share with you a poem that was shared at one of Harvard's graduations over this past weekend by a woman named Duha Hassan. She said this: "I had a dream. I went back home and I slept on my bed and I felt warmth again. I had a dream. I went to college and I nagged all day how hectic it was. I had a dream. I wanted to live. I had a dream. I had my favorite meal. I had a dream. My ear forgot the war's sounds, shouting, bombardment, mother's sobs, and losses. I had a dream. My eyes forgot the blood, the loss, the patience, obligatory patience. My nose forgot the smoke smell, the deaths, the corpses rotten. My hands stopped shivering. My body skipped what lived. I had a dream. Not panicking, not imagining death everywhere. I had a dream." She dedicated that to Gaza during the graduation ceremony. May God go before us and make that dream a reality, that all people could live at peace, that Gaza's atrocities against it would come to an end, that the Prince of Peace would come. In the name of Christ, amen.